So try to excuse my singing voice, I'm a little sick, but as Dr. Ashton said, my name is Chris, right? Kind of why you should be listening to me. I'm a powerlifting coach. I coach like 12 powerlifters. They're all in the USAPL drug tested powerlifting. And then I'm also kind of responsible for running the training programming for Dr. Campbell's studies last spring for his muscle farm research. He had me write the program for that, and then this semester he actually allowed me to do my own research, which I wrote the programming for that. So I noticed I don't have really any letters after my name, and in all honesty, I kind of haven't had the time to really get those letters after my name. But I try to make the most of whatever experience I have, and I do a lot of self-educating, and that's kind of brought me to where I am. A lot of the information in this you're not going to just get from the exercise science program. That's kind of why I wanted to give this presentation. I think the program does a really great job giving you this base knowledge, and I think it's really on the individual student to take that base knowledge, and it's up to them to really take it a step further. So these are kind of the steps that I've taken learning. You'll notice, and you've seen Strength Tape before, the book that I write for, that Amy is the owner of, and that's what I do my coaching through. So, does anyone know what periodization is? I'm sure we've heard it at some point. Anyone? All right. Well, as our definition says, it is the systematic planning and structuring of training variables throughout design training timeframes aimed at maximizing performance and minimizing potential for overtraining or decrements in performance, right? So, essentially, it's your roadmap, right? 2 points that I'm going to pull from this definition is that it's systematic and that we're dealing with training variables, right? It originates from the word period, so it's breaking your training into divisions of time, and by breaking it into these smaller time frames, we can have focuses on certain things. Now, I have to give a little disclaimer, as with periodization, there tends to be, as soon as you say the word, there'll be just absolute fights and brawls between academics, between coaches, fighting over a lot of times the exact same thing. The language itself isn't really clear, and that's because when they were doing a lot of the research, they were just pulling it out of Russian coaches' notes. It wasn't the clean-cut research that we get today. And so because of this, you'll hear a lot of different terms that in reality just mean the exact same thing, and people will be fighting over that. But the whole goal is to just show you what periodization is and how to give you the basics to kind of go with that. It's really easy to overcomplicate it, and that's kind of not what we're going for. So periodization originated in 739 BC with Olympic athletes, right? There's record of them planning their training. In 1936, the German weightlifting team were periodizing in 4-year plans. So they're building and writing out entire 4-year plans of how are we going to train for each Olympic game. And from there, research really kind of took off. So, like I said, the first portion of it is that it's systematic planning, right? We're connecting smaller parts that we're dividing time by to build this one complete goal. So, first of all, to do this, we need to ask, what is our goal? Am I a weightlifter trying to lift a specific amount of weight on a specific date that I need to peak for this one day? And I didn't mention this, but periodization can be used for not just your strength sports or your weightlifting sports or even just lifting weight in general. It can also be used for your aerobic sports. So am I a marathon runner trying to run a certain distance at a certain time on a certain day? Or am I a field athlete like a baseball player and I'm just trying to come in with a certain level of base strength to take me through the season? The other thing we have to ask is, does your training have a flow to it, right? Am I just throwing random things, random exercises and going from there? Or do I have an actual plan that makes sense and you can ask yourself, is what I'm doing right now adding to my goal, whatever that may be? So we have to ask those 2 things, making the systematic plan. It's divided into these different traditional periodization cycles. So we have the macro cycle, mesocycle, microcycle, and then at the bottom here in this chart, you'll see we have the workout itself. Macro cycle will be between a year or more. That's kind of your base layout when you're thinking long term. Mesocycle will just be weeks to months, and that'll depend on, again, the goal as well as what kind of athlete they are. A baseball player, their mesocycle is going to be much different from an Olympic weightlifter who only competes in the Olympics once every 4 years. Microcycle will be typically on a weekly basis, and then again, the workout that's the smallest unit that we use to measure, obviously. And then we have the quadrennial cycle here. That's our 4-year multi-plan that I discussed with the German weightlifters we're doing. So now the training variables that we're building off of, right? We have volume, intensity, and frequency. I kind of threw in, it's not a training variable, but I threw in specificity. So we're just going to describe what these are really quick. Volume is the amount of work that you're doing, right? This is going to be the #1 predictor of strength and hypertrophy. This is shown time and time again in the research that your volume is key. Accounts for up to 70% of your progress for the most part. But we also have to pay attention to the law of diminishing returns, right? So has anyone ever heard of the Russian squat program Smolov?
Spell that.
S-M-O-L-O-V. Do we have any numbers?
No.
So yeah, Smolov is known to be this hardcore squatting program where you're squatting 4 days a week and sometimes multiple days in a row, and then on the third day you're squatting 85% of your 1 rep max for 10 sets of 3, right? It's just a ton of volume thrown at you, and it's known for putting hundreds of pounds on people's squat. Now, we have to ask, am I getting stronger because these are some magical numbers, or is it just because my volume has tripled? And we also have to ask, long term, because of the law of diminishing returns, what do I have to do to get stronger from there? Do I have to keep on running small more and more and keep on adding more volume? So these are all kind of things we have to consider when we're building these long-term plans. So volume is measured typically for lifting in total tonnage, right? So let's say on a given day I'm squatting 250 pounds for 5 sets of 5. That equates to 6,200 pounds in total tonnage, right? That's how we can quantify how much work we're doing. For aerobic sports, a lot of times we'll use mileage, right? Miles per week, miles per month, miles per entire training cycle. And given what your goals are, what kind of athlete you are, and what you're trying to do with your training, we'll kind of divvy out what your volume needs to be. So the next variable is intensity, right? This is the effort expended. It's the second most important variable for strength and hypertrophy, but it becomes more important as you age as well as you're losing weight. Typically, it's given as a percent of your 1 RM, but it's kind of becoming more popular to use an RPE. It's kind of where things are going now, where we're realizing that I may be a 300-pound squatter tomorrow, but I'm only a 290-pound squatter the next day, and 90% of my 1 rep max might be different. So instead we use the RPE. Have we all heard of the RPE scale, right? This is specifically for resistance exercise, and it's given to you by how many reps you think you have in the tank. So instead of saying we're going to do 5 sets of 5 at 80% of your 1 arm, we're going to say you're going to work up to a set of 5 at an RPE 9, right? And it should give you an idea of how hard it should feel.
Chris?
Yes.
Where did you get that RPE scale?
The RPE scale is one that we made, and it's based off of research from Dr. Mike Sortis at FAU.
Okay, can you just send me that reference just
Definitely.
so I can have it? Thank you.
And if any time you have questions, feel free to stop me. So for aerobic sports, we might use percent of your heart rate max or percent heart rate reserve, and other factors that you can use to measure what your intensity is. And then something I'm not going to really get into, but you can vary your intensity with rest intervals, right? I'm not going to really get too much into that. Next, we're going to talk about frequency, right? How often something's occurring. This is kind of where my research fell into play, right? Where we had volume and intensity staying the same between 2 groups. The only thing that we changed was frequency. And there's a lot going into this now, as we see Bulgarian weightlifters who were squatting sometimes 18 sessions per week, right? Because they believe, if I want to get good at my sport, I need to do it a lot. Ken is not even Bulgarian, but he's used all the time when talking about Bulgarian squatters. So I threw his picture up there. It's more appropriately broken down between, say, body part or lift, right? Even if we're just lifting in the gym, we have our chest and tricep day or our squat day. That's kind of how we quantify what frequency is. And then as I mentioned, specificity, how similar is what you're doing in the gym to what you're, or how similar is your sport to what you're doing in the gym in your training. So let's say I'm working with a powerlifter, right, and he's 6 months away from his meet. Odds are I'm not going to be using very specific movements, right? I just want to build an overall base strength and lessen his chance of getting injured. So I might use a box squat, whereas if I'm 2 weeks out, all I'm going to do is squat, bench, and deadlift for the most part because it's very specific to his sport. Same thing with aerobic athletes. A lot of times you'll see in an off season, you'll tell your athlete, you want them to keep their aerobic adaptations, but you don't want them to be overusing the same muscles that they've been using. So for a cross-country runner, you might have give them intervals on a bike, right? It's all about just kind of managing what keeps them healthy and how close they are to their competition. So this is the repetition continuum. You'll see this in your strength and conditioning class. Campbell loves this. But this is kind of telling you what your rep range is and what your best rep range is for what you're trying to work for, right? So if I'm in the 20 rep range, I'm working best my muscular endurance. Whereas if I'm in the 2 to 3 rep range, I'm working best for strength and power. This is kind of what you can use to build training, right? We know, okay, I want to work on someone's power. If I wanted to make someone a more powerful athlete, I'm probably not going to be hitting this rep range so much. Or I'm not hitting this rep range specifically for the power. At the same time, we have to understand that there's a lot of research now showing that it's not about what rep range you're in, but how much volume you're accumulating. So in one study particularly, they did 3 sets of 10 versus 10 sets of 3 at the exact same intensity. And they found that the 10 sets of 3 group built just as much muscle, but got stronger than the 3 sets of 10 group. And the 3 sets of 10 group had greater muscular endurance. So it almost seems that hypertrophy is kind of a side effect of your volume, and whichever your rep range you're at will determine whether these adaptations are becoming more strength-based or muscular endurance-based. Yeah.
What's the difference between power and strength?
So power is how, there's a speed component to it, right? How fast can I move a given weight at a certain percentage, whereas strength is just amount of force that you can apply. Powerlifting kind of has a misnomer to it because it's a very slow sport.
Yeah.
In reality, well, weightlifting is a very fast sport. It's very powerful. So if anything, those names should kind of be switched, but we're not going to do that. So yeah, power has that time component to it. How fast can you move it? So yeah, just something to keep in mind for how to work what adaptations you're trying to get. But also always remember volume is kind of key. So athletes that, I wouldn't even, before I say athletes, but the population that I kind of poke fun at a lot of times is CrossFitters, right? CrossFit. Because in general populations, they're kind of criticized that they do not train, they just exercise, right? Do we know the difference between training and exercise? So training is for a given goal, for exercise is just for exercise. But CrossFit athletes, they do periodize their training. This is something that Danny actually wrote up for one of his athletes. And just as I mentioned, specificity, we see that 3 months out, you can even see by what the goals are, just kind of how specificity is at play, right? So we're working on your skills, your base strength, and your aerobic capacity. CrossFit's a very interesting sport in that it's a lot of GPP, general physical preparedness, as well as a lot of skill work, right? You need to be able to clean and jerk a 1 rep max, but you may also have to run a 400 meter and do this entire other block. So you see he's back squatting 2 sets of 10 in this example, 3 months out, right, trying to build a base strength. However, when they're 1 to 4 weeks out, the goals are now different, right? We're working the lactic threshold, their skills, and their power output. So how are we going to do that? Well, now they're squatting 5 sets of 1 at 90%, right? So there's a whole reason for why the training is built this way. It's just to mention that CrossFit athletes do in fact periodize, even though there's a lot to kind of work with. There's still a plan, there's still a reason for what they're doing. Okay, so this is an example that my good friend Ryan came up with when he wrote an article on periodization, and I liked it. and so he's letting me use it. So we have Joe Bro and Steve the Science Guy, right? Joe Bro is your classic, just kind of go into the gym, do whatever you want, and Steve the Science Guy is periodization, right? And they're both in Washington, D.C., and they're trying to drive to LA, right? But they have two different methods of doing this. Joe Bro has the equipment, he has what's necessary, he has a car, he can fill up his car with gas and just head west and say, I'm just gonna drive until I make it there, right? It's essentially what training is if you're not planning it, if you're not periodizing. Steve the Science Guy, on the other hand, has a different approach, right? I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna plan out what's the best way to get there, what are the most effective routes, where can I stay, and how can I get there in the least amount of time. Now, eventually, at some point, they're both going to get to LA, right? As long as Joe Bro is heading west, he's gonna get there. But we don't know how much time and effort he might be kind of wasting, whereas Steve the Science Guy already knows how he's going to get there. And so we're gonna translate to gains, and we see that Joe Bro might, at first, he gets a little bit of a head start, right? He just jumped in and he just went, whereas Steve the Science Guy kind of slowed himself down and said, hey, this is how I'm gonna get here. He may have planned a deload here so he can have a better performance later on. And we see specifically at week 8, right, before he needs to get there. Same thing, maybe he planned a deload so he can kind of propel himself forward. Whereas Joe Bro just kind of went, he had his ups and his downs, but he didn't really know where he was going. And this is the same concept. If you're training for anything, even if that's just your own personal training, in the gym for yourself, I think that you should have a periodized plan, or else you really don't know if what you're doing is effective. So practical experience, this is my other good friend, Brandon. I didn't mention, but so I've coached 2 athletes at nationals, Jordan obviously, and then my good friend Brandon here. And he is now going to IPF Worlds this summer. But this is kind of an example of where his training has gone over the last few years, right? So in 2012, that was his total for his given body weight. That wasn't really too great. A year later, he put almost 200 pounds on his total. That's pretty good. And then about 4 months later, he put almost 100 pounds on his total. Now after this last meet in March, he asked me to work with him for the first time. And I believe it was around 6 months later, he put 200 pounds on his total. Now the only difference from all this and this is that during this entire time, I used to ask him what he would do for training, and he said, yeah, I just kind of freeball it. He would essentially go to the gym. If he felt great, he'd go for a PR. If he felt terrible, he'd lift something and then just go home early. But he really didn't have any plan whatsoever. And then the first time that he actually had a plan, we put 200 pounds on his total. And then as we see in July, he had an elite total, 1702. And like I mentioned, he ended up going to nationals and winning, qualifying for worlds. And so this is just kind of showing how he was already a pretty strong guy, right? Just not even knowing what he was really doing, he built up a pretty good amount of base strength. And once he finally kind of let me get my hands on him, I had the easy job because I already knew what he had to do. He had never touched volume in his life, right? I asked him, the first time I ever worked with him, he squatted 395 pounds for sets of 8. I asked him when the last time he squatted less than 405, and he said probably 2 years ago. And I asked him when was the last time he did more than 5 reps, and he said never. And it just kind of shows where, just because it may not feel very difficult at first, there's a reason, there's a purpose behind it. And sometimes things need to feel a little easier to gauge your end goal, which for him is that day of the meet when he needs to total these numbers. So what does the literature have to say about it? For the most part, it's pretty well understood that periodization has greater effects for your training than not periodizing at all, right? This is a meta-analysis where their conclusion was that periodization is far superior than not planning your programming. So with this, we have to ask, why does periodization work, right? This is our physiology of it. Have we heard of the general adaptation syndrome? Okay, so that we know 4 phases, right? Alarm phase. This is kind of my get your notebook out, because the next slide is going to be from Dr. Ashley's slides. So our alarm phase, our body has an initial reaction to a stressor. What does that, let's say we're walking into the gym, we had our session. What are some initial reactions to that stressor? What might that be? Great. So delayed onset muscle soreness. This is from your slides. This will probably be on your test. are DOMs caused by holding lactic acid in the muscle?
No.
You don't know, okay. Short answer is no, right? If you're sore the next day, it's not because you still have lactic acid in your muscle. It's because of these things. Minute tears in the muscle will be a big one. A lot of time it's from the eccentric portion, right? You all know what that is, right? If I do a bicep curl, it's this long eccentric portion that'll give the more so of the muscle tears. Osmotic pressure changes causing fluid retention, spasms, overstretching, and potentially tearing of portions of the muscle. Acute inflammation, alteration in cell mechanism for calcium regulation, right? And Dr. Ashley, if you have anything to add to these slides, by all means. So it's a combination of all these factors, but we all know if you go and you went into the gym your first time ever, you're probably very, very sore the next day, as well as very tight. Some things I just want to touch on really quick. A lot of times when your muscles are tight after lifting, it's not so that your muscle is shortened, but it's that there's a neural signal being sent to that muscle telling it to stay tight, have some tone to it, right? It was just work, and so your body is reacting to it and saying, okay, we were just used a lot, we need to keep some tone just in case we have to be used again, and that's where you get that tight muscle. But the other important thing is to remember that our body kind of keeps a blueprint of what we've done, right? So if I squat 225 one day, and then 3 days later squat 225 again, odds are I'm not going to be as sore that second time because our body wants to reach homeostasis as fast as possible. So that will be in the second phase, our resistance phase, right? Our body is beginning to recover and prepare for the event to occur again. I was planning to kind of draw this out, but you can imagine we have homeostasis here, right? And let's say this is your performance. You have that first session, your performance is going to be a little lower, right? You're going to be tired, maybe feel weaker, more fatigued. That would be our first phase, the alarm phase, and then during the resistance phase, you're building back up to reach homeostasis again. And then this is something that's still kind of debated, but I believe that we do supercompensate, right? We'll be slightly above homeostasis. Our body overcompensates for that stimulus to reach homeostasis, and these are kind of the adaptations that we're going for through this supercompensation. And so, what are those adaptations? This is another slide for your class. And I'm going to just call out on people to tell me if it's greater or less. So do we have greater or less effective motor unit recruitment from resistance training? Greater, correct. So an example that I like to give for the first two, okay, I'll ask, do we have greater or less synchronization of motor units? Greater, yes. So do we know what those two are? What recruitment of motor units are? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
All right, and do we know what greater synchronization of motor units means? Yes? Okay, so the synchronization, yes, Dr. Ashley.
I just want to throw in here. Some of you are really, really, really well versed in all of this material. Others may not be. So if you don't understand what motor unit recruitment is, if you don't understand what synchronization is, please raise your hand and ask.
Yeah, so I'll just explain them.
Thank you.
Recruitment, we know what the motor unit is, right? The most basic pathway. So the more motor units we recruit, the more muscles that will be fired at one time, right? So an example that I'll give for this is, let's say we have someone squatting for the first time, and they're just squatting the bar, versus someone who's been squatting for years. Now, both of them are only squatting the bar. That's a very, very light weight. But the person who's been moving that weight or squatting for years can probably move it much faster, right? They've trained their motor pathways to be able to fire faster and fire more synchronistically, right? They're firing at the same time, that's what that means. Whereas someone who's never squatted before, odds are it's probably gonna be pretty slow, a little uncoordinated. And this is what we mean by your neural adaptations, right? We know that neural adaptations are what come first from resistance training, and this is just becoming more adapt to the movement itself. So muscular adaptations, right? Hypertrophy, greater or less contractile proteins. Greater, yes. Greater number and size of myofibrils. Greater. So we know that our muscle fibers do not split and duplicate, right? Have we have we kind of gone over that concept and that we have the fiber, and that our fibers can hypertrophy, right? They can grow, but they do not, for the most part, we haven't seen it in humans that they can split and increase in number, right? We have seen that in cats, but we have yet to see, for the most part, in humans where fibers are increasing in number, but they do increase in size. So greater or less connective tissue from resistance training? Greater, yes. And then greater or less quantity of enzymes and stored nutrients?
Greater.
That would be greater as well.
Quick question
Yeah.
about the muscle splitting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I heard from like a, I guess like a bro section that it's not from a scientific
Yeah.
literature, but I heard that like human growth hormones would allow muscles to gain more muscle cells and stuff like that.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, unfortunately,
Any type of,
I don't hang out in the bro area too much, so that's not a topic that I really know enough about. It's very possible. There's a good chance that they're not running research on that because we're not really, for the most part, we're not concerned with how much muscle can I build from human growth hormone. Although that is a topic that probably should be looked into because of the legalities and stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's like plus? It's all gaining, right? So why is it plus and minus? Is there actually like a decrease?
He actually took that slide directly from my slides, and so I put plus and minus so that we would talk about it and you would actually choose
Okay.
which one.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So now for the connective tissue and bone adaptations, right? Ligaments, tendons, and bones all become stronger. Something that we need to remember is that bone is not just some dead tissue, it's very much alive, it's very much adaptable. In fact, our body is so good at adapting that we can even accidentally, and this is a clinical issue, but we can actually grow bone in our muscle given the right circumstances. That's obviously something that we do not want, but it just goes to show how adaptable our body is, right?
When would that occur and why?
A lot of blunt trauma, as well as just constant hematomas. Your body sees that as, I need to strengthen this area and become more rigid. And there's a clinical term for it that it's way too long for me to remember right now. But yeah, it's a pretty big problem. Highly unlikely, but it does occur. So our bones very much adapt, much like our muscles do, right? They become more dense. This is very important for elder populations. This is very important for women who need to prevent osteoporosis. Resistance training helps to protect your joints and muscles from injury, and you kind of use that as a preventative strategy for, again, your elder populations and your women at risk for osteoporosis. But the key is greater intensity resistance training for the most part. Cardiovascular adaptations, so there is a physiological hypertrophy of the heart wall. I'd ask Dr. Ashley to explain that a bit more, because that concept kind of went over my head.
Yeah, it's when we say hypertrophy of the heart wall, we're just talking about hypertrophy of the myocardium.
Right. And then while you're lifting, there is an acute increase in blood pressure. However, there is no literature demonstrating long-term increases in resting blood pressure. Yes.
I got a question for Dr. Ashley.
Yes.
For the hypertrophy of the heart wall, how
Yeah.
would you achieve that? Is it like a certain beats per minute or volume that causes the tears in the myocardium, or a certain intensity of your physical activity?
I hate to say this, I'm not sure, but it's pretty much almost any exercise, just like with any other muscle. If you overload it, then it's going to adapt, and one of the adaptations of resistance training is just an increase in the thickness or a hypertrophy of the myocardium. Yeah, so I mean, that can occur with resistance training, that can occur with aerobic training, both. Yeah.
All right, so as far as the acute increases in blood pressure, right, we know when using the Valsalva maneuver, that's something that for general population I really don't recommend it so much, but for powerlifters, every single one of them should be using it, in my opinion. And that's when we're taking this big deep breath in, and we're essentially holding our breath to create intra-abdominal pressure. This pressure kind of constricts your blood vessels, which will cause for this increased blood pressure, but not using the Valsalva will also aid in this increased blood pressure, right? We're having a hard contraction of our muscles. This is why we have this acute increase. But like I mentioned, there's no long-term increase in resting blood pressure. Okay, and I kind of touched on this already when I was speaking about small, but we have a repeated bout effect, right? So every single bout of exercise protects the muscle from damage and from bouts to further incur. And because of the repeated bout effect, we can't just lift the same weight every single day and get the same adaptations, right? We have to kind of do a little bit more. We have to overload. And so this is another physiological reason of why we periodize, why we plan. So we know how are we going to overload over time, right? This is a table from your book, pretty much explaining what the response is. Definitely feel free to look at that or the test I recommend. And then another thing I was asked to touch on is just the gender differences in muscular strength. So when it comes to absolute muscle strength, men typically have greater strength than women, right? 50%. Women are 50% lower in absolute strength for upper body, and about 30% for leg strength. But it's important to remember this is absolute strength, right? Men are naturally larger, carry more muscle. But when it comes to the strength per unit of muscle, it's almost perfectly even. Men do tend to have more type 2 muscle fibers, making them potentially more powerful. And they have greater amounts of testosterone, which would explain why they have a larger size and are able to carry more weight. But when we actually view the cross-sectional area for a male and a female muscle is not weaker, and for the most part it's about even when you account just their muscle mass. This is a picture that I borrowed from a man named Greg Ruckles. Oh yes, we had a question.
Can we go back for just a moment?
Yeah, sure. So this is a figure that I'm borrowing from a guy named Greg Ruckles. This is his website. And this just kind of explains the gender differences in metabolism and why this applies to differences in performance and adaptations, right? So we see from this, it's a little hard to read, but that your fat-free mass activity has the greatest effect on your metabolic rate, while as another 10% is just based off of other factors like your age and your gender, right? So the older we get, the lower our BMR gets. But this is kind of explaining why women are metabolically more active than men, given the amount of muscle relative to body fat they have. So everyone, right, 90% of your metabolic rate is going to be based off your activity, your lean tissue. But this 10% can be contributed to other factors, and one of those factors is gender. And so we see that men have significantly more muscle mass, women tend to have significantly more fat mass. Men will have greater strength, absolutely, but when it's units per muscle cell, it's equal, right? However, women have better metabolic health, right? And this is kind of based off of the way, one, their blood markers, right? And just what they use for training, right? So we have, our glycogen, fat, and women tend to burn more fat given an exercise intensity, right? So essentially what this is kind of explaining is how women can handle more volume and adapt for more volume because they're more metabolically adept than males, right? And so we can kind of use this when building or programming for a female specifically. For the most part, we just need to keep in mind that they can handle more. They can handle more reps, they can handle more work, and recover from it faster than men. Are there any questions on this? Because I know it's a little confusing in the way it's kind of planned out. And then, as it says here, your substrate usage, right? In a fed state, women will use more carbs, while males will use more fat.
In a fed state?
Yes.
Huh.
And then during exercise, relative to males, women will use more fat. Okay.
Wait a minute, go back.
Yes.
Sorry. Say that again, and I can't see just because I'm old and I didn't have good eyes, but the substrate usage chart, can you read me what that says?
Yeah, so it's in the fasted state, they're equal, men and women.
Okay.
In a fed state, women use more carbs than males.
And that's at rest.
Correct. A rest fed state. During exercise, women will use more fat, whereas males will use more carbs, right? And this is kind of going into just metabolic differences between the genders. And then post-exercise, women will be burning more carbs, whereas males will be burning more fat. So there are some physiological differences, and this can kind of be used to when building your training. But all in all, what we need to really keep in mind is that men have absolutely greater strength, and relatively though, pound for muscle, they're about the same.
And Chris, is that a reference at the bottom?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So now we're going to go into some examples of periodization, right? Like I said, as soon as you throw the word out there, there'll be people standing up, ready to go, ready to fight. When in reality, it's really, if you break it down, it's all about those base factors, right? It's all about intensity, volume, and frequency. And how we spread that out might be different, but for the most part, we're saying a lot of the same things, right? So we have linear periodization here, right? That's kind of your classic, used a lot for Olympic athletes in that they don't have one big season that they have to work for. And so they'll periodize linearly where their volume is starting high, right? And then as it drops, the intensity increases until they reach where they need to peak, right? So say for a competition, they want to be specific for their sport. So I'm going to use powerlifting again. Their sport is lifting the heaviest weight that they possibly can for one repetition. So in their training, towards the end, they're going to be working with heavier loads for lower amount of repetitions, right? Daily undulating periodization is kind of making a lot of waves now. And a lot of the times, the terms that we use are for things that have already been done, already been said. We're just changing the name. But essentially, instead of it being this perfectly straight line, we're undulating, right? We're moving up and down. So on one day, as you see here, the linear group, they're doing 3 sets of 8 for 3 weeks, 3 sets of 6 for 3 weeks, 3 sets of 4, right? Their intensity is most likely getting higher and their volume is going lower. For the daily undulating, they're doing the exact same amount of work, but they're doing 3 sets of 8 on one day, 3 sets of 6 on another day, and 3 sets of 4 on another day, right? And the whole idea behind this is that we're working all the adaptations every week, rather than only certain adaptations at a certain time. So ideally, the linear periodization group, they're working a lot in that hypertrophy range that I described, and they're ending in this intensity phase. But if we remember the chart with the continuum of reps, it's believed that if we're not working in this hypertrophy range, then we might be losing adaptations that we built over here. So this is where daily undulating, the theory behind it is that we're working all 3 adaptations on different days, right? But you still see there is still this line or this trend where volume is going down and intensity is increasing, right? It's just waving. And these are just kind of certain models. I'm kind of explaining how the terminology might be different, but it's all saying the same thing, right? So in Western block periodization, we block off our training into certain weeks, similar to linear, where we're working certain adaptations at a certain time. So these are your hypertrophy, strength, and power block, right? I'll work the hypertrophy rep range for 3 weeks, the strength range for 3 weeks, and the power range for 3 weeks. Well, in Eastern Bloc countries, they call it the accumulation, intensification, and realization phase, right? They're accumulating a lot of volume, which is what you need for hypertrophy. They're intensifying, right? They're increasing the load, just like you would do for strength, and then they're realizing those strength gains that were made, and so this is where they're working that same power range. So just different words for really the same thing. And then as I mentioned, we have linear, we have daily undulating, and these are just more examples of periodization and how they're different in the way that they manage volume intensity and frequency, but it's still all they're doing is just adjusting volume intensity and frequency. That's the really big thing to keep in mind here, right? And this is just kind of to demonstrate just how complicated it can be, while at the same time so simple, right? So this was an Olympic athlete's entire training plan. I can't even tell you what this is saying. I can see the words volume and intensity though on here, and we know that they're lifting a certain amount on a certain day. But also just shows just how much has gone into the planning, right? They planned for this huge long portion of time, and for the most part, they're at the absolute highest level of their sport. So it's just to remind you that it can be very complex and very complicated, but in reality, if we use those base variables, it's very simple as well. Are there any questions? Yes, Dr. Ash.
I have a couple of questions. And I've asked this before, and I've been told this before, and I guess I just kind of do a brain dump after I hear it. So if you can humor me one more time and explain. I know what a bodybuilder is, but can you explain the difference between powerlifting and weightlifting?
Okay.
And would you consider powerlifting, weightlifting, and bodybuilders all athletes? And in that, define athlete.
Okay.
I know that's a lot, but
Yeah. So we're going to start with the difference. So powerlifting and weightlifting are both based off this concept that we're doing a certain lift for the most amount of weight possible.